In the 13th century, the Mongol cavalry thundered across Asia and Europe, conquering everything from Persia to Eastern Europe. Yet when they rode south toward a small kingdom called Viet, they met an unexpected wall. This was a nation of only around 4 million people facing off against the world's most feared army, who had already subjugated much of Eurasia. And not only were they able to stop them, but they did so 3 times. So, how did the world's most feared army suffer 3 crushing defeats here? To answer that question, we need to go back in time to the year 1220. At this point, Genghis Khan had united many nomadic tribes in Northeast Asia under the banner of the Mongol Empire and was beginning to plan his next move. His goal was to expand into Southeast Asia and control the lucrative trade routes there. He also wanted to use this new territory as a staging ground for attack other powerful enemies, which lay between modern-day Vietnam and Cambodia. To do this, he needed to further conquer the small kingdom of Viet, which today is known as Vietnam. So he sent his general, the brothers Ali and Bahar, to begin the invasion. Yet what the Mongols didn't know was that although small, Viet was almost tough. He had to unify himself more time and return home. Decided to play to their strengths. The Mongols were a highly disciplined and mobile cavalry force, relying on swiftness and precision to win battles. They were also excellent archers, capable of firing off multiple arrows in quick succession. All of these traits were on full display as they easily defeated the kingdoms in their path and swept across northern Daviet in 1226. But as soon as they crossed the Red River, things began to change. Here, the landscape shifted from open plains to dense jungles, winding rivers, and thick, humid swamps. The terrain was alien to the steppe-dwelling cavalry, and the seasoned soldiers struggled to navigate the unfamiliar landscape. And then there was the weather. The intense tropical humidity sapped their strength, and the stifling heat seemed to follow them everywhere. To make matters worse, food and supplies were scarce. There weren't any settlements around. And as the Mongols pushed further south, the Vietnamese continued to implement their scorched earth tactics. They retreated deeper into the jungle, cutting off any resources or supplies that the Mongols could use. This strategy paid off big time during the second attempt in 1258, when the Mongols again pushed north. By this point, the Vietnamese had grown tired of the Mongols and were eager to fight. The ensuing battles were brutal and resulted in massive Mongol casualties. With their numbers greatly diminished, the Mongols fled, never to return. And that brings us to the third invasion in 1285, led by the grandson of Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan. Once again, the Mongols rode north with high hopes, but were quickly met with fierce resistance from the Vietnamese. Although smaller in number, the Vietnamese were well-trained and disciplined, making them a formidable opponent. But Kublai Khan was confident in his military superiority and pressed on. At this point, the Vietnamese king, Tern Than Tong, realized that they couldn't defeat the Mongols head-on, so he implemented a new strategy. Instead of facing the Mongols directly, he ordered his troops to hide in the dense forest and wait for the right moment to strike. As the Mongols advanced, they were picked off one by one until only a few remained. One of these was the Prince Thoat Hone, who managed to escape with only a handful of men. As he fled, he knew that if he couldn't get help, this would be the end of the Mongol invasion. Upon hearing the news of his father's defeat, Thoat Hone's brother, Tern Nan Tong, immediately took action. He gathered all available troops and set out to rescue his brother. Despite being outnumbered, the Vietnamese were confident in their ability to defeat the Mongols. After all, they had done it before. The resulting battle was one for the ages, with both sides fighting fiercely. But in the end, it was the Vietnamese who prevailed. Many of the Mongol enemies Finally, the Mongols were ultimately undone by their own hubris. They thought that they were invincible and that no one could stop them. But in the end, it was the Vietnamese who proved them wrong. With the Mongols defeated, the Vietnamese were free to continue their campaign to unite Southeast Asia. Over the next few centuries, they would go on to conquer much of the region and establish a powerful empire that would last for centuries. Although many books have been written about the mighty Mongol Empire, little attention has been paid to their 3 defeats in Vietnam. Why is this? Well, it may be because the Mongols were so powerful and so dominant in many parts of the world that it is hard to imagine them ever losing a battle, let alone 3 invasions. But the truth is that the Mongols were not invincible, and they were eventually defeated by the Vietnamese. What makes the story even more amazing is that the Vietnamese were able to defeat the Mongols despite being vastly outnumbered. For example, in the 1285 invasion, the Mongols had over 50,000 troops while the Vietnamese only had 10,000. Yet the Vietnamese were still able to win the battle. So, what was the secret to their success? How were they able to defeat such a powerful enemy? The answer, in a nutshell, is that the Vietnamese played to their strength and exploited the Mongols' weaknesses. They used their knowledge of the terrain to lure the Mongols into traps and then ambush them. This strategy was particularly effective against the Mongols because they were so used to fighting on open plains where they could use their superior cavalry skills. But in the dense jungles and winding rivers of Vietnam, the Mongols were at a disadvantage. The Vietnamese also used scorched earth tactics against the Mongols, denying them food and supplies and forcing them to retreat. This, combined with the difficult terrain and the Vietnamese people's sheer determination, proved to be too much for the Mongols to overcome. There are many lessons that can be learned from the Vietnamese defeat of the Mongols. For example, it shows that even the most powerful army in the world can be defeated if they face an enemy that is prepared and has a good strategy. It also teaches us that we should never underestimate our opponents and that we should always be willing to learn from those who are different from us. The Vietnamese people's courage and determination in the face of overwhelming odds is truly inspiring. They showed that it doesn't matter how strong or powerful our enemies are, if we have the will to fight for our freedom and independence, then we can overcome any obstacle. And so it was that the Vietnamese people, through their bravery, ingenuity, and sheer willpower, were able to defeat the seemingly Mongol creatures. In doing so, they protected their homeland from wars and secured their place in history as one of the greatest underdogs.